This is a podcast which does not shy away from difficult and vulnerable topics. The content is of an adult nature and we do swear at times.
Welcome to the Autistic Licensed Podcast. I'm Shauna and I'm in Carrickfergus in Northern Ireland.
I'm Leo in London.
We invite you to listen in on our conversations as we experiment with unmasking in an autistic space. We talk about what it means to discover we're autistic as adults, especially with established careers as therapists. We want people to know that autistic therapists exist and to broaden the conversation about neurodiversity. You're so welcome to join us, whoever you are and wherever in the world you are. We hope you'll find something of interest and connection here. Catherine, would you like to share anything with us about where you're at the minute, who you are, anything, just to kind of maybe give us something to jump off?
Sure. So I'm Catherine. I live in California. I'm 66 years old. I began to start identifying as autistic last summer, so right around my 65th birthday, and had the usual deep dive, obsessive, looking at every single autistic creator of writing or YouTube or anything. Also had plenty of imposter syndrome. So I did sign up to receive a formal evaluation. Mm-hmm. And it was mainly just for my own, just to have someone I trust. Oh, sorry.
Oh, you got fireworks going off.
I have no idea how I made that happen.
Are you on an Apple computer?
Yes.
There is something about.
I think if I do like that, I'll get.
Yes, exactly. There you go. Yes, I knew about this. This has happened to me a couple of times in sessions.
Let's see.
I love that.
Do anything.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I received my evaluation just 3 months ago in September, and they confirmed not only that I am autistic, but that I also have ADHD, which I would have had no idea, because my autism so effectively compensates for whatever gaps I have through ADHD. I've got scaffolds and systems and processes and lists and planners that help me keep my life organized. And so I do have trouble reading a whole book. I struggle to read a whole book. Yes. But otherwise, it surprised me to learn that I had ADHD, but it kind of makes sense.
I don't know how you've disclosed to those around you, but what has been some of the reactions to both of those things, maybe kind of individually?
Right. Well, starting with being autistic, because that was what I understood first. Yes. I told my husband, and in the past, he hasn't really known how to deal with mental health things that I've been going through. Mm-hmm. But he's learned, and he was great. And he basically didn't bat an eye and said, that makes sense. Then I told my kids, our kids are in their 20s and 30s, three children, and none of them batted an eye. None of them batted. They completely got it. Yeah. ADHD, since I don't really, I still have a hard time sort of wrapping my mind around it. I haven't talked as much about that with other people. I finally told my parents I was autistic. Uh-huh. And my dad has dementia, so he doesn't remember the conversation. But my mother, it's really important to her to be normal and to have normal children. And so I was a little worried about this conversation going south, but she referred to someone in another branch of the family as being on the spectrum. And I said, well, so am I. Okay. And she said, well, yeah, aren't we all a little bit? And I said, well, actually, no, but I definitely am. It's possible that my parents are also autistic, but I feel like they are adults and that's their journey. Like my kids, they are divergent in some ways, but it's their journey to decide if this is something that they want to identify with and embrace.
Yeah. There's so many. I think part of Shauna's nodding now is there are a couple of very specific similarities in my own story as well, which was
that's what I was nodding at.
Yes.
You talk about that kind of, you've had that comment about everybody being on the spectrum.
Yes,
not actually meaning that they are, but just
yes, but it's certainly something my mum has said. But also the whole thing about going off for autism diagnosis and then getting this bonus prize of ADHD, which for me too was just never, for exactly the same reasons that you laid out. All my processes held up those parts of me. That didn't occur to me. I think the difference was I have struggled with many people close to me to convince them that I'm autistic, or not, I suppose convince, because I don't seem it by the stereotypes that they hold. However, the ADHD thing, everybody, the same with the autistic side of you. Nobody was surprised by that at all. I was the only one who was surprised by that one.
Yes, that's very interesting.
But yes, the bit that I felt...
Sorry, go ahead.
The bit that I thought was, the visible part was the invisible part, and the bit that I wasn't even aware of it was so invisible, everybody thought, oh yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
No, I used to go around reciting pi to a ridiculous number of decimals. I memorized a string of it when I was 12 years old, and that was my party trick for the next 10 years. So.
I wonder what would happen with me if I got diagnosed with ADHD or I started talking about that, because it took me ages to see that in myself. Because Leo, you said it for ages before I was able to see it. So I wonder if that's like a blind spot. And although people find it really hard to see the autism, might they see ADHD? Might it be like that in me? That's really just the thought of that as a possibility of things that people see that you don't think they see. Yeah. But maybe my desire was to mask the autism. Maybe unconsciously was to mask it, and maybe the ADHD just was out and obvious to people. It's really interesting when you realise that you think that you are not being seen in a certain way, or you feel like you're not being seen, but you're not actually being beheld, but you are actually in some ways things that you're not seeing in yourself that they are being seen by the other people, especially if there's not so much shame around it. And maybe there was internalized shame about coming across as autistic for me, but maybe there wasn't so much on an ADHD angle, it didn't even come in. So maybe that's the thing that's been unmasked and has been out there without me knowing.
And the other thing I'd say, Catherine, to kind of really support where you are now with those two strands of your identity, that you're comfortable, it sounds like, or certainly leaning right into that, the autistic part of your identity, because that's the bit that was self-realized and that you went and got the shiny piece of paper about, and also, as the imposter syndrome thing is just absolutely universal. Everybody holds that all the way through, right up until and beyond diagnosis sometimes. But what you were saying about that being part of you, but the ADHD being something that you hadn't kind of got your head around, or because it was maybe a surprise, then again, I think that's very familiar too. And I wonder if it works the same way the other way around, that somebody who notices their own ADHD-ness and goes and pursues that and gets the surprise dual diagnosis of autism feels the same way. Or because it always seems to, we've had this conversation a few times, I think, that it always seems to me that my autistic self feels much more part of my being or my personality. And ADHD seems to be more, and I don't think this is actually true, it's just how it seems to me, to be more a symptomatic thing that means I, exactly the same as you, can't read a book all the way through. Or, I don't know, I don't feel as emotionally connected to it until more recently, when I have actually pursued a clinical diagnosis. And so that has changed. And I think I do think also it's the whole one thing at a time capacity.
Oh, you're not kidding about that. The year, once I started identifying as autistic and I was doing that deep dive all year, my sensory, what would you call it? Things bothered me a lot more. Yeah. I had to practically shave my head, because I couldn't stand the sensation of hair. This is long compared to how it was. I needed to cut everything back that drew any of my attention except figuring out who I was. And of course that, the assessment doesn't stop that process. That's lifelong. Imagine.
what I'm struck by that, although what you're describing to some people probably sounds maybe extreme, to cut everything else out so that you can do that focus. That's really attractive to me, actually. That sounds, and I'm sorry if it was really horrible for you, but I'm just saying my reaction to that sounds amazing. I wish I could have kind of thought I suppose I did a version of that, but the idea of just kind of dialing every other sense down so that you can just experience that one strand.
I hadn't thought about that as an enjoyable process.
I wouldn't have thought so. I'm sorry.
Necessary. I mean, I actually did love a buzzed head. Like in the summertime, also short hair, it people off a little bit, some of them. Although, again, my kids didn't bat an eye. But it felt I needed to move everything out of the way.
Yes.
So that I could do this important work of figuring out who am I?
Yeah.
And what took you, what begun that? What were the sparks?
Well, about 10 or 15 years before that, I had started asking the same question, am I autistic? And I found some researcher who was doing some study with adult autistic people. So I sent them an email and I had a brief conversation with a graduate student. At the end of 15 minutes, she said, well, I can see why you thought you were, but I don't think you are because it's been such a pleasant conversation. So, in bless her heart, I'm sure she's realized now that was not the most fruitful thing to say. So I set it aside. And then the spark that came up this time, I was describing to my sister-in-law, who's an inveterate reader and an inveterate traveler and a lovely, lovely human being and neurotypical, absolutely not autistic. And I was describing to her why travel is really a challenge for me. And I don't travel very often, but oftentimes the research I do on a place, which would include going into Google Maps, the Google Earth View, right? Okay. And like literally walking down this street in this little village in Norway so that I've got all the places memorized. I feel like I've been there. She said, would never occur to me to do that. I just like to go to a place that I've never been and start exploring. Yeah. And I realized there's a fundamental difference. And then that kind of clicked in. I was doing some ADHD research on behalf of one of my kids at the time. And so the algorithm started feeding me other things. And I think it was Yo Sam De Sam. Her experience, like, oh my God, that sounds like me.
Wow. And all the sensory things that you suddenly became aware of, did it feel like for all of those years before, like you just couldn't take them in? Like there's something where, people sometimes say, oh, your autism is more obvious now that you're diagnosed or something like that. And these are people watching our behaviour. And actually it's healthy because we've had them all shut down for so long. And then, I guess it also then can be quite amazing then to think, oh, how have I got for all of these decades of life without realising that my hair annoys me or my clothes annoy me, or like when I really started to realise that there was things that I was wearing that I couldn't cope with wearing anymore. And I think just like, how did I do that? How did I go for all that time? And of course that brings up grief and stuff as well, but I'm just expanding on that a little bit, what you said about that experience, which is very intense, can be very, very intense when we realise how that's all been shut down and can feel it and name it.
I think being autistic in this world is uncomfortable. You get used to being uncomfortable and you just assume life is uncomfortable. It's just hard. Life is so you don't, the pants that are too tight or the shirt in the horrible fabric, the shoes that squeeze or the small talk necessity. You just assume this is part of life and you got to kind of suck it up. And only after I've been experimenting that just with short hair, but like wearing soft day pajamas all the time, eating foods I like. There's no shame in a same food breakfast.
We both resonate very, very strongly with that one.
Life is more comfortable now because I realized I was putting up with a lot of stuff because I thought it was expected or required. And this is one of the blessings of being in your 60s, right? You don't care as much.
Yeah, I wonder whether there are these key life stages or there's these opportunities at certain stages of life. Like I feel like whenever I was going into like midlife, like that was whenever I needed to get in touch with this. And that was an opportunity. And obviously I could have pushed that away and focused on other things. We always have choices. But whether, there are key seasons of life, key transition points that we have opportunities to look at things like this. And maybe, for some people that's maybe their student days or their transition into the workplace or out of the workplace or, becoming a parent or, all of those kind of points that maybe it's more likely that we might have a need to look at this kind of thing because life just becomes too difficult to cover it up or not to look at it.
I hadn't thought of that, but I think you're right. So my realization came roughly at empty nest.
Yes.
And all of a sudden I had the scope to think about this. But before that, all the way through school, through the early career, through raising small children and teenagers, etc., through helping my husband do a business project, there was always something to do. There's always something I had to do. And suddenly there was space in my life about it. Now, but I'm very lucky. I don't think I could have done this at any previous life transition because there wasn't the communal understanding. There wasn't the material that there is now. I don't think I could have understood even 15 years ago, there was a little understanding that this graduate student assumed that autistic people are unable to mask how awkward they are.
Yes. Yes. Definitely 15 years ago was whenever I was starting to look into it with my daughter. She was a baby. And I can look back now and I can see the way that I was presenting as the mother of that baby. I think nowadays would maybe possibly have made someone think, I think that mother is autistic, let alone baby. But in those days, there was, it was just, I was over anxious and I cried a lot, there was not that understanding, and there certainly wouldn't have been anywhere for me to look for anything that wasn't very pathologizing about, and I wouldn't have recognized myself, even though now when I look at younger me, I can see it really, really clearly. And so that would have been another life had the resources been around me that I could have identified myself if there was the resources around. That would be, I feel like that's a key point, for nowadays, that there are, people who are coming to know themselves much sooner when they have children, rather than, maybe 10 years down the line or whatever I was, I don't know how long down the line, 9 years down the line of, my daughter being identified. Well, no, my daughter being a baby. She was formally identified as autistic at about 5. So a good 4 years after that before I caught on that I was just the same as her.
I had, when my kids were young, I had the ableism that so many of us have. So I was not open to the idea that any of my kids might have been neurodivergent, even when I didn't know that word, right? And when my daughter was an adolescent, she started asking for support. And so, without talking about her life, we learned that there was a neurodivergence there. But before that, I just thought, well, all my kids are really beautifully different and unique and individual. That's so cool. And it didn't occur to me that there was a bucket that could be placed into the neurodivergent bucket.
Yes. Yeah, I feel like me would have needed to have been worked on in a relational kind of way, so that really the best intervention would have been to support me, and then that would have empowered me to do what I did do for my daughter anyway, but it would have given me much more support, and I wouldn't have felt like I was floundering on my own intuition as to what she needed. And it was very clear that she wasn't fitting into the parenting handbooks, and also that I wasn't doing what the professionals thought I ought to be doing for her. The ableist way, I wasn't worried about the label though. I searched for all sorts of templates and ways of understanding her, and went into like the highly sensitive stuff, and there was a lot of some other things, just even like fussy babies and all sorts of things that which is all neurodivergence, but they didn't name it as that. Just trying to grasp, but not in those days actually realizing that I was within the same framework, although the manifestations were different, and they still are, because no two autistic people are the same. But I, just didn't. Language would have gone a long way if we'd have had what we have now.
Exactly.
This is actually quite a big realization that this conversation has just given me historically. Catherine, it was when you were talking about, getting in touch with that researcher some years ago and being told, yeah, there's bits and pieces there, but no, that's not you. Actually, I'd forgotten something. So when I was an undergraduate, I was just a mature student when I did my bachelor's degree, so I was like 21. It was a weird setup. I was at this very weird faculty called the School for Independent Study. It was unique in the world at the time, and you essentially, you studied alone at something very, very specialist. And it had to be definitive. Lovely. It was lovely. It was fantastic. You spent the first term of this 3-year degree writing your program with a tutor that they kind of computer dated, matched you up with to the best of their ability based on what your interest was. Mine, funnily enough, was speech radio. And so I was paired up with this tutor randomly because he'd written a play for BBC Radio 4 in the 70s. And that was, and he used to be a journalist. And one of the upshots of that was that I ended up being a journalist for a while, which wasn't my intention. However, it was him. He was my personal tutor for those 3 years. And his wife actually ran the faculty. So there were 2 academics that were a couple. And I stayed in touch with them afterwards. And for years, they came to my first wedding. And, even after that, I worked with him for a little while on a project. So I knew them anyway. Sorry, this is all pointless backstory. The point was that I remember this would have been, now let me think, it would have been the mid-90s. So it's 30 years ago. Went round to their house for dinner and spent the evening with them. And I'd forgotten I did this. I made a comment about feeling that I was autistic and that I would, at that time it would be Asperger's, and that probably would have been what I would have been diagnosed with. And I mentioned this, and it so happened that some friend of theirs had an autistic child who was very autistic, very visibly autistic, lots of struggles. And they really kind of laid into me. I was told off quite sternly for appropriating, I guess, a label that clearly had nothing to do with me. And don't you realize how much these people suffer? And, you have no right. And that completely shut me down for 20 years, actually. I had forgotten that until you just mentioned that particular narrative. So it's been in my awareness and identity since I was in my mid-20s, I guess, or late 20s, at least. I mean, I think I always probably... That's why I'm always interested in, what were the first sparks for people as well. And, the possibility of them being shut down, anything up to quite recently would be quite high.
Right. And even recently, I think, I'm sure we all get aren't we all on the spectrum? You don't look autistic. I had a 5-year-old nephew, etc. Yes. I actually do have a nephew who is autistic. I do have that, that person in my life.
Yes. And that didn't invalidate you.
Not at all. In fact, I came out to his mother's, the Christmas card guest, who else is autistic. We'll see. We'll see how that lands.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
The A team. I'm on the A team.
Fantastic. I like that. I've never heard that. The A team of the AU team. Yeah.
I can't claim it. I heard it. No. It was when I got my assessment back and I posted it in this Facebook group that I was in, and someone said, "Welcome to the A team." So
I love it.
I can't claim it. Our community.
Yeah.
So I have a question for both of you about autistic identity. I got an email yesterday, the latest thing that Devin Price has written about. It's a question that came to them from an anonymous autistic person who said, before I realized I was autistic, I had plenty of confidence. I always assumed that I was liked and that I would be accepted and that I made a great first impression. Now, with this realization, I'm going back and reviewing all these memories and realizing those times I thought I was liked, I was tolerated. And those times I thought I was being admired, I was being made fun of. And I think back on, so my freshman year in college, I lived in a freshman dorm of 180 people. I knew everybody. I was out there. I was singing annoying songs in the hallway. I was outrageous and fun and quirky and probably manic pixie, right?
Manic pixie.
I'm not in touch with a single person from my university. I didn't keep any of those ties. And I realized now the whole time I thought I was fun. I was getting on people's nerves. I was not reading the room. So what this anonymous reader says is, with this realization, with this painful self-consciousness, it feels like my social skills are declining. Like I feel more awkward than I have. And I'm almost like, I'm just nervous to go into groups now. And I wonder if either of you had experience like that, an awareness like that, as you started living into your autistic identity.
In consciousness, I'm having it right now.
Yes, you do. No, you do. We've talked about this.
I mean,
you do have,
but in that specific way of, I mean, I certainly the reframing thing of thinking back and think, oh my God, now that was so autistic of me, and I wonder actually, did I perceive correctly how that would have been received? Because I would say the same thing. I was the outward, loud, funny, or precocious, musically talented. Sometimes there were things that kind of stood out, which always made me feel, oh, well, I am worthy. I am worth something to these people because of these aspects. And I am already aware of a lot of behaviors that would have been and still probably are incredibly irritating, but which I now understand better. But actually, I would have the same experience that I do not have. I've got a few very close, very, very long-term friends, but actually same I mean, it's a little bit different now because we connect over Facebook with people from our past and we have those kinds of relationships. But has started me kind of thinking about how my personality was perceived by the majority of people rather than the close ones who genuinely loved me. And I think there probably is a lot going on that I haven't really readdressed. The other thing that you said, though, as a kind of as an outcome of that, is how many people you're in touch with and losing social confidence. I don't think I've lost social confidence, but I have lost pressing need or obligation to have a social life, actually. I think I'm much, much more comfortable now going, actually, I'm really cool on my own for a lot of things. I actually don't need as much social connection as I've been felt I should need and have been able to foster because I can be very outgoing and gregarious. But actually a lot of that was performative, and the idea that I should have this network of social life around me, I now realize, so it's not a decline in confidence, but I think it is a realization that I don't have that need in the same way that I always thought I did, that I'd be devastated not to have people, and people are so important to me. I must have them around all the time. And I was always very, absolutely terrified of ever being on my own. We talked about this in a recording just yesterday, I think, and others. That was the worst thing I can think of. And now it's a really attractive proposition, because I've got to exercise it in various ways
That's very encouraging, just kind of reframing it. I used to try and have coffee dates with the moms at my kids' school. And if I had 3 or 4 coffee dates in a week, that was a good week. And I was getting out there. And now I have, 3 or 4 close friends, and I see each of them anywhere between once every 5 or 6 weeks and twice or 3 times a year. And it's fun. It's enough.
That's it.
Yeah. I'm a wee bit different because I kind of always was a bit like that. I never I never, because that's my nature. So, and also I always believed that I wouldn't be liked. So Leo and I have talked about this on the podcast before. So I was always covering up out of possibly quite an extreme belief that I would not be liked and people didn't like me. And actually, I think like Leo and I actually talking about this over the past year and a half is causing me to doubt that. Like maybe I wasn't actually was disliked as I thought I would be, because nobody saw who, like I wasn't coming out of myself anyway. So how can you, so, but it was still a kind of a belief that I now have to think back and reassess. It might be a very different belief, but it was also to do with being autistic, being different and wanting to cover that up. And it was almost like, well, let's not just not give any evidence, and then a damage limitation sort of way. But I was always somebody who only had a few friends and kind of made it a point to kind of go, well, like it's only a couple of people that I trusted at any one time, so that's what I'll do. Interestingly, I can see that this phase of my life that I'm kind of going into in recent years and upcoming years, there's almost like more of a desire for wider contacts, but not looking for closeness in that, because I've got my closeness needs met. So kind of just actually, what would it be like if I was, if I experimented with just saying the things, and then it doesn't really matter, but just experiment with saying the things, and it's more about how that affects me afterwards. And if I can say the things and not come back and overanalyze and think, they definitely think I'm strange, it actually allows me to be more myself.
The transitions are in very different directions, but they're the same. They are, aren't they? They are questioning what our needs actually are and what we've always assumed them to be, or told, in fact, and the stories that we've told ourselves about ourselves. Oh, I'm funny and gregarious, and I'm really good at getting people's attention and making them laugh, and therefore that's my value in the world. And then, and that's what I need too. That was the story as well. I don't exist.
That was the love, the social connection that you needed. That is how you sought it.
Yes.
Yes.
So I actually didn't start out as gregarious or outward at all. I was definitely labeled shy. I believe I dissociated for my first 3 years of grammar school because I have no memory of talking to anyone or being spoken to. I was just overwhelmed and just kind of went into myself. But I was always, I'm a quick learner. I could read onto my level, etc. When I was in the 4th grade, 10 years old, there was a girl in the class who was kind of made fun of by the other kids. And I knew what that felt like. I was the new girl that year. So I publicly befriended her when she was having a hard moment. She and I became the closest of friends, and she was fearlessly different. She didn't care. And that gave me the courage to experiment with, as you say, saying random things, acting in random ways.
Yeah.
That was the beginning of my journey toward the extroversion that I expressed my first year at university.
Yeah.
Now I'm kind of going back in just because I've discovered the joys of solitude or the joys of this kind of connection where you've got a very small number of people talking about things that matter.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Straight to the grit.
Yeah.
You've just triggered, and I don't know exactly what it was that you said there, but again, another really profoundly important memory that just hasn't occurred to me in all these years of having autism as a special interest and an identity, was that when I was born, my parents and I lived in a tiny flat until I was 3, nearly 4, and Mum was pregnant with my sister, and we moved to a flat, which then they took over the whole house, and it was the house I grew up in. And when we first moved there, there was a family next door who had a girl the same age as me, and then there was a huge family that lived opposite us with a whole bunch of kids ranging from a little bit younger to me to fully adult. And they were all really, this is when you play out in the street. And it was this quirk story, that I didn't speak to them, any of them, for a year and a half, but I played with them every single day. And it became this game for them to make me talk. And that one day I half remember this, I think, just decided, today's the day, I'll let them have it and I'll start talking to them. But I had relationships with them, we played every day out. I'd never connected that as selective mutism, which it absolutely was. There was a real barrier. It wasn't a game for me. It was for them. But I realized that I could set up all of this communication and these relationships without speaking at all. I only spoke when I was indoors. This is just before I would have started school, so that hadn't come up really.
That's really fascinating. So what was your experience starting school? Because it's indoors in a different setting, but it's outside of
horrific. And again, I reframed that now as absolutely traumatic. So because I have a birthday that's right in the middle of the summer holidays, and here that means that I'm right on the kind of borderline. Okay. What's your birthday?
I know. I was always one of the youngest.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, so I'm August 18 and I'm in the middle of the summer holiday, so I could kind of have been in either year. It was quite fine when I started, and I actually started school a year later, so I was I was 5 when I started school, and most people were 4. And that was my first day was absolutely traumatic. I screamed and screamed and screamed and threw up and all day. On separation from my mum. I don't remember after that, but that day I remember particularly. And of course, again, I can think, well, that was an autistic kid who I don't entirely understand what the trauma was, other than massive separation anxiety, but it was more than that. It felt like
part of it had been overwhelmed because all of a sudden you're in a room full of a large number of people you don't know.
Exactly. And I wouldn't have ever been in that environment before. That's brilliant. See, I just recalling it now, I wasn't able to think what were the factors. Yes, that would have been an enormous one. Being in the care of somebody else who I didn't know at an instant with no preparation. And by the way, she was horrible, that first teacher. She was an elderly lady who hit me once, actually, and drew blood. She slapped the back of my hand once, caught her nail in the back of my hand because I was being too chatty. 5. And I remember I told my mum, and she did go back into the school and had a massive stand-up row. This woman, Miss Freeborough, I've just remembered her name, completely denied it. Just said, no, I didn't.
Right.
But
you had a mother who stood up for you. That's actually...
I did, and that meant a lot at the time. Yeah.
I remember I remember the Leo in my class. His name was Bobby, a girl named Nancy. They cried on the first day. And I remember thinking, those 2 children are crying, but I was just absolutely frozen. I don't remember, almost no memories of those first 3 years. I don't remember any of the teachers. And I think it was only in my 3rd year that I actually began to make a friendship with one of the other students, another shy girl, probably autistic.
Mm-hmm. I remember all my teachers, but I don't remember any of the kids that I was at school with for the first 2 years, 3 years. After that, plenty. But yeah, fascinating.
I'm interested in the speaking thing. Did you do nursery school?
I went to a play group. It was called Playgroup. That was local. Yeah. And so, yes, I was in that environment for probably a year, and they were half days. So it would have been like for 3 hours in the morning. I think that would have been Monday to Friday. And I liked that. And I imagine, I will have to check with my parents, that there was a better transition there. First of all, it was a very hippie outfit. And my mum also worked in a playgroup with two friends of hers that ran a playgroup. It was not the one I went to, but I had been to theirs when I was very little. Of course, I hadn't thought of this.
Okay. Yeah.
I spent a lot of time as a baby up to 3 years old, 4 years old, in a playgroup environment with my mum.
With your mum, yes.
And two friends who were family friends who were running the place as well. So I knew it really well, actually. It was a familiar environment. It was much, much smaller, totally based on play. It wasn't a classroom.
Yeah.
You know, it was completely different. And so my memories of my time at playgroup officially are pleasant. I enjoyed it and I loved the people that ran it.
Yes.
I don't remember anybody who was there. And it was over the road. It was right opposite the house of a childhood friend as well, who I imagine attended as well, who was my age. So yeah, very, very different.
There's a loss of that as well whenever you then find yourself in school, and it was not like that. So things were going to be completely different than how they would have been. Yeah. And do you know if you spoke whenever you were in playgroup?
I think I would have. No, I imagine I would.
You spoke at home and you spoke in playgroup. You just didn't speak with the children.
Outside, yeah. Yes. Really selective, very specific.
I wonder if there's something about being outside, the sensory world of being outside, that took more of your process. And so there wasn't enough left to do the complicated work of speaking.
That's really interesting. And I suppose because we're good, I say we, but I think I'm probably speaking for us in different ways, you know, at ritualizing and routine, you know, having set routines and childhood play is very much about that. I'm going to ride my trike up to the first lamppost and back, and then we're going, you know, whatever the things were. And that can become the communication anyway, but it is odd. It's not way to be. Is it
so odd though? Because I'm doing a training thing at the minute, and within that group, I hadn't spoken a few times for a few weeks, and I decided to speak and share something around how I needed to hear my voice in that space. And if I didn't break it and open, turn it, speak something out and hear that when I opened my mouth, words came out and other people registered them, that if I didn't do that, I was telling myself that I was not going to contribute. And I was able to have the clarity and the self-awareness and able to experiment with doing that in front of the 25 people on the screen. And, I feel like an unaware version of me, or a part of me, or a version of me that wasn't able to be courageous enough to have done that, would still, 6-8 weeks down the line of that course, not have spoken. And that's the case in certain places, I guess, for lots of people. Like we go into a certain environment and something happens to us where we feel not safe enough to speak, or everybody's more intelligent than me, or I don't know enough about this, or there's no time for me to speak, or someone's going to jump in before I can put my hand up, or I'm going to look silly, or whatever we tell ourselves. But then we get like, that's my way of being in that environment. And it might not be my way of being in all training environments, or in all, say there's just a group of people that I'm very quiet with. And it was one of those in the moment adult self-aware experiences that I actually spoke out and used as a learning opportunity for it. There was something just about acting that, playing that out, that also feels relevant to this, where, little Leo decided that in that company, he wasn't going to speak, or he couldn't speak. And you told yourself that, and it was true, and then it became more true and more true and more true. And then they tried to encourage you to speak. Because I've also been, like, one of the most shaming training experiences I have been through was during COVID. And I was not used to all these people on a screen. It was one of the first online training things that happened. And the facilitator said, I can see the ones that aren't talking. I can see the quiet people on my screen. You can't hide. Now, really bad practice. Really bad practice. And what it did to me was, dug my heels in. I am fucking not going to see this now. There's no way I'm speaking up because you're trying to call me out, and I'm sitting here learning and perfectly fine. And maybe I would have spoken, but I'm certainly not, because you've just, it's aggressive or gaslighting.
It's very ableist. It's very ableist.
And it's ableist as well, but it also, all of those experiences dictate, or maybe someone's talked on the first day of something and then they've got affirmation and then they feel like, oh, I always talk. And this can be in person or online. But I just, we can easily get into those roles, and maybe as children all the more so. I'm the quiet one, I'm the shy one, I'm the one that always talks. And, maybe I'm the one that's always chatty, so there's been other times in your life, Leo, whenever you've been the chatty one. but in this group, you totally were.
And the effect of that now, and I find this with so many autistic people that I speak to, it's another thing that seems almost universal, is that, you know how we've said many times, nothing just happens. There's some kind of process. Nothing is spontaneous, really. There's processes for everything, and scaffolding and all of that, that support us in, particularly with interactions. But one specific thing about that is when there is a group, and, there, especially in therapy training, where they don't say, go round in a circle and introduce yourself. It is very much, you let the group form by itself. You let people decide when and where. And the strategies that I've had to decide at which point to speak among a group of maybe 15, and to vary it as well. So keep track of, did I speak right in the middle last time? In that case, I don't want to give that impression that maybe, and so I'm going to speak 12th today. And in every single interaction, there was a conscious monitoring and a process. Never be first, almost never be last, but within that has to be very, very equally shared out and varied across the spectrum of where I come in, and monitor that. I've heard so many people kind of say, oh yeah, me too. I can't just wait until something comes up and jump in.
I've never done that.
It reminds me of the stress of being in a group conversation where you keep thinking, you just
can't get in.
This is, I guess, famous among autistic people, that we don't know when to break in, when to say something, what to say. I don't know how neurotypicals do it. It's like jump rope, that when the rope is already going and you're supposed to jump in. I could never do, because I also have dyspraxia.
Of course, well, there's that. Yes, absolutely. I can understand.
So I have social dyspraxia, I suppose.
Social dyspraxia. Lovely.
Right. I've coined it. I want.
Yes.
Yeah, you coined it. That's okay. I'm going to copyright it for you.
Absolutely.
So I besides the thing from Devon Price, there was one other piece that I wanted to bring up. It's a tab that I've had open for probably 2 months, ever since I read it.
Okay.
The author is Seren Sterling, Seren, and the title of their piece is Shifting My Unmasking from Revealing to Unearthing. And it's quite a lovely thought piece. But I go back and read it every couple of weeks. They talk about how in the beginning, when they realized they were autistic, unmasking being like, I'm going to stop pretending to be neurotypical. I'm going to engage in stims, or behaviors that were just as artificial.
Yeah.
And led to social discomfort, et cetera. And so now they've gotten to the point where they're more just kind of doing an archaeological dig, finding what's there. And that mainly involves listening to their body. Yeah. Everything, not just I need to use the restroom, or I need to eat, or I need to sleep, but this environment, I feel uncomfortable here. Let's figure out why and fix it.
Yeah. Yes.
If we grow up, as I'm sure many of us did, being encouraged to disconnect from our bodily needs and to deny our bodily needs, a really important piece of growing.
I'm getting rained on. I'm just going to close my Velux. Hold on.
Is it smelling like petrichor?
Very good link, Catherine.
I love that smell. It's my favorite smell in the universe.
It's kind of like what you were talking about all the sensory onslaught and being real about what we experience in our bodies that we've shut off and shut away, isn't it? What you were talking about at the beginning. And so it's making me think as well, you know, oftentimes it's assumed that as autistic people, we can't tune into our interoception and what's going on. And it's making me wonder, like, is it can't, or is it just have had to shut that down? And we can learn if we will attend and if we will give ourselves permission and compassion as to what we're going to find. Maybe it is there. It's just, it needs re-practiced, because we just haven't been able to. It's been too much. It's been overwhelming. It's had to be shut down, but maybe we can get it back.
I think the key word in what you just said is compassion, because the things that we unearth about themselves, like finding I'm way more awkward than I thought I was. Yeah. People thought I was annoying. Like those things, you just have to have compassion.
Yeah.
And realizing I'm still just as worthy of love as all those cool neurotypicals.
That's beautiful.
Yes. Yes.
So now for something trivial. I'm a little bit fascinated by what looks like something like a brontosaurus on behind you, but it's face on. Oh, I was right. Oh, wow.
I think they call it a brontosaurus now.
It is a brontosaurus.
Yeah. So this, when I was pregnant with our daughter, or my first, we went to this, like, I don't know, church rummage sale, and some elderly lady had made this dinosaur, and my daughter loves it, and she won't let me let it go. So this is the guest room that she stays in when she's here.
Hey! So, I picked a good thing there for a little story. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Bronto used to have a crocheted collar that didn't match at all his blue. That was probably the old lady also could crochet and just
yes.
put it all together.
Oh, that's lovely.
I don't know who made it, but I appreciate her.
That's lovely.
And that's a quilt. I'm looking at Leo's background now. That's a quilt, isn't it?
That's not a quilt. It's a Japanese wall hanging of koi carp.
Oh, of course.
And then over here, I've got a wall hanging from China, which actually I found on that I bought secondhand, because I specifically wanted a wall hanging of a particular of a Japanese scene, because I just Japanesed my office for purely culture appropriated aesthetic reasons. I just like it a lot, and so I just did a search for a Japanese wall hanging of a particular size and found this particular one in a vintage shop online and bought it. And actually it's exactly the same age as me. It was painted in 1966 in China for the Japanese market.
Okay.
I've never heard that story. That's great.
I can show you all my embroidery. That's my new interest, but it's both an interest and a stem and a Christmas presents for everybody.
Oh, wow. How lovely.
Does that have a theme? Yeah, go on, please.
So this is, my son will not see this podcast, but I've given him all. These are kitchen towels.
Oh, lovely.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
So for my son, I've done botanical.
Oh,
trees near where he lives. There's one more. There we go.
beautiful.
Oh, okay.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So this is all. I'm a beginning embroiderist. So.
It's so intricate, isn't it? Like the size.
It's so, I mean, one of those will take 8 or 10 hours to do, but it's so calming.
Is it?
Just the same thing over and over. This lovely, slightly resistive sensation of pulling the thread through the hole in the
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
Is there anything else before we finish up?
Well, I will actually say, despite all the difficulties of being autistic, one of the things I love most about it is the sensory stuff. And I've got synesthesia, and so the sensory stuff is just, it kind of layers on itself. Mm-hmm. But like standing on a pier and looking at the waves curl toward the shore and watching the way the sun hits the back of the wave, it just lights something up. Mm-hmm. And I think I'm very lucky that I get to experience the natural world in such an intense way.
Yes.
Oh yeah, there are great things about being autistic.
I have a very large canvas of very.
The waves. That's what we're looking at.
I don't know what we're looking at.
Yes. You see how the water forms this kind of comb texture as it comes over the curl?
Well, this is a picture I took in Northumberland about 10 years ago. And I like it because of that autistic things of very, very neat lines and layers.
Yes.
But it does show.
It's actually moving and the sun hits it and reflects off it in this completely smooth way. There's nothing better.
I am a show-off. This will just confirm the show-off parts of me, won't it?
I'm a very happy audience.
Okay. It fitted there.
I do want to ask a question. Just okay. Again, it sounds very self-regarding, but I'm interested in how you found the podcast in the first place.
Let me think about this. I believe it was one of those Facebook groups for autistic people. Someone posted something about Autistic License, and this is when you just started. I think you had maybe 2 or 3 episodes up. And I listened, and I mean, confession, one of the reasons I love the Great British Baking Show so much is because the variety of accents. It's not that you're not lovely people, but part of the fun is just listening to the way both of you speak. But also, your conversations are they're real, they're relaxed, they're on topics that pertain to my life. So, yeah, I'm a fan.
That's interesting.
I discovered you on YouTube also, so it's
oh, good.
same material, but just a different way of accessing it.
That's right. Okay, that's really nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Catherine, it's been so lovely to spend time with you. Thank you so much.
It's been a privilege, and you made it way less scary.
Thank you for doing it, Catherine.
Thank you for listening to the Autistic License podcast. You can connect with us via Instagram, Facebook at autisticlicense.com or by email at autisticlicense@gmail.com. And we spell license the British way, LICENCE. We also have a thriving Facebook community. Search for Autistic License Shauna and Leo or click on the link in the show notes.